The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty general store, and Genevieve Morrison pressed her palm against her stomach, trying to steady the nausea that had nothing to do with the rough journey from Philadelphia. It was May of 1878, and she had traveled nearly 2,000 miles to reach this remote corner of Utah territory, sent away like damaged goods to hide what her family called her shame. At 20 years old, she carried a child from a brief courtship with a banker's son who had disappeared the moment she told him the news, leaving her to face the consequences alone while he sailed for Europe with his new bride. Her Aunt Clara had made the arrangements quickly and quietly. A distant cousin named Martha operated a boarding house in Monticello, a small settlement that had only been established a few years prior by Mormon pioneers, and a handful of ranchers drawn to the San Juan County grasslands. It was remote enough that no one would ask questions, isolated enough that Genevieve could have her baby and perhaps find work afterward, and far enough from Pennsylvania society that her family's reputation would remain intact. They had given her $300, a single trunk of belongings, and a one-way ticket west. The driver helped her down, his weathered face kind but disinterested. Genevieve stood on the wooden boardwalk, her traveling dress covered in red dust, and looked around at what would be her new home. Monticello was smaller than she had imagined, just a collection of rough buildings scattered along a wide dirt road with the Abajo Mountains rising blue and distant to the west. The afternoon sun beat down with an intensity she had never experienced back east, and the air smelled of sage and dry earth. "You must be Martha's cousin." A woman in her 50s approached, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. "I am Martha Jenkins. Welcome to Monticello." Genevieve tried to smile, but her lips trembled. Martha's eyes softened with understanding as they traveled to Genevieve's middle, where the carefully tailored dress still mostly concealed her condition. "Come inside," Martha said gently. "You must be exhausted from your journey." The boarding house was a sturdy two-story building made of local sandstone and timber. Inside, it was surprisingly comfortable with simple but clean furnishings and windows that let in the bright Utah sunshine. Martha showed Genevieve to a small room on the second floor overlooking the main street. "You can stay here as long as you need," Martha said. "I could use help with cooking and cleaning if you are feeling up to it. The boarders are mostly ranch hands and a few miners passing through. They are rough men but generally respectful under my roof." Genevieve unpacked her trunk with trembling hands after Martha left. She hung her few dresses in the narrow wardrobe and placed her mother's Bible on the small table beside the bed. Then she sat on the quilt and let herself cry for the first time since leaving Philadelphia, mourning everything she had lost and fearing everything that lay ahead. The next morning, Martha woke her before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the boarders. Genevieve tied an apron over her dress and joined Martha in the kitchen, learning to work the large cast-iron stove and mix biscuit dough in quantities she had never handled before. Back home, they had employed a cook. Here, she would earn her keep with her own labor. The boarders began filing into the dining room as the sun rose, and Genevieve kept her eyes down as she served plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits. She could feel their curious stares and heard the whispered questions they directed at Martha. A new woman in a small frontier town was always a source of interest, especially one who arrived alone and spoke with an Eastern accent. "That is enough gawking," Martha said firmly. "Miss Morrison is my cousin, and she will be staying here to help me. Anyone who gives her trouble will find himself looking for new lodgings." Genevieve was carrying a coffee pot back to the kitchen when the front door opened, and another man walked in, late for breakfast. She glanced up and found herself meeting a pair of steady gray eyes in a sun-browned face. He was tall and lean, probably in his mid-20s, with dark blonde hair that needed cutting and the confident bearing of someone who spent his life working outdoors. He removed his hat politely and nodded to her. "Morning, miss." "Good morning," Genevieve managed, feeling her cheeks warm under his direct gaze. "That is Lucas Kane," Martha said from the doorway. "He runs cattle on a spread about 5 miles north of town. Lucas, this is my cousin Genevieve Morrison from Philadelphia." Lucas smiled, and it transformed his serious face entirely. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Morrison. I hope you will find Monticello to your liking." "Thank you," Genevieve said quietly, then escaped to the kitchen before he could see how flustered she felt. Over the following weeks, Genevieve settled into a routine at the boarding house. She helped Martha with cooking, cleaning, and laundry, keeping busy from before sunrise until well after dark. The work was exhausting but also a blessing because it left little time for dwelling on her situation. Her body was changing daily now, her condition becoming more obvious despite the loose aprons she wore. Martha never mentioned it directly, but she made sure Genevieve had enough to eat and insisted she rest in the afternoons when the heat grew oppressive. Lucas Kane came to town twice a week for supplies and always took his meals at the boarding house. Genevieve found herself watching for him despite her better judgment, and she noticed that he always chose a seat where he could see her as she worked. He was unfailingly polite, thanking her for every cup of coffee and complimenting the meals in a way that seemed genuine rather than flattering. One evening in late June, Genevieve was sitting on the front porch trying to catch a breeze when Lucas rode up on his bay horse. He dismounted and tied the reins to the hitching post, then climbed the steps to the porch. "Mind if I sit a moment?" he asked. Genevieve glanced around, aware of the impropriety but also aware that frontier life had different rules than Philadelphia society. "I suppose that would be acceptable." Lucas settled into the chair beside hers, stretching his long legs out in front of him. For a while they sat in comfortable silence, watching the purple shadows lengthen across the mountains. "How are you finding Utah Territory?" Lucas asked eventually. "It is very different from home," Genevieve admitted. "Everything is so open and empty. Back east, you can barely see the sky through all the buildings and trees. I imagine it must seem lonely after city life." "Sometimes," Genevieve said carefully, "but there is also something freeing about it. No one here knows who I was or what I was supposed to become." Lucas turned to look at her, his gray eyes thoughtful. "And who were you supposed to become?" Genevieve hesitated, then decided there was no point in pretending. "A respectable wife to a suitable husband. A hostess for dinner parties and charity events. A mother to legitimate children who would grow up with every advantage." "That does not sound like something you wanted." "It does not matter what I wanted," Genevieve said, hearing the bitterness in her own voice. "I made choices that took those options away." Lucas was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something, Miss Morrison? Out here, people care more about who you are now than who you were back wherever you came from. We have all got things in our past we would rather forget. What matters is what you make of yourself going forward." Genevieve felt tears prick her eyes. "That is kind of you to say, but I think you know my situation is somewhat more complicated than most. I know you are a woman alone, far from home, working hard and carrying a burden that should not be yours alone to bear," Lucas said quietly. "I also know you are brave as hell for facing it the way you are." The casual profanity should have shocked her, but instead Genevieve found herself laughing, a genuine sound that surprised them both. "My mother would faint if she heard you speak to me that way." Lucas grinned. "Then it is probably good she is not here." After that evening, Lucas made a point of talking with Genevieve whenever he came to town. He brought her small gifts, a bundle of wildflowers, a perfectly shaped piece of sandstone, a book of poetry he had ordered from Salt Lake City. Genevieve knew she should discourage his attention, but she found herself looking forward to his visits more than she wanted to admit. He treated her with a respect and genuine interest that made her feel valued in a way she had never experienced, even before her fall from grace. As July turned to August and her pregnancy became impossible to hide, Genevieve noticed the other townspeople beginning to whisper. Martha's protection only extended so far, and frontier communities could be as judgmental as any Philadelphia drawing room when it came to unmarried mothers. Several of the female shopkeepers refused to serve her, and the minister's wife made pointed comments about sin and redemption whenever Genevieve passed her on the street. One afternoon, Genevieve was walking back from the general store when a group of women deliberately turned away from her, their backs forming a wall of disapproval. She stood frozen on the boardwalk, clutching her packages and fighting tears, when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Miss Morrison, perfect timing. I was hoping you could help me pick out some fabric for new curtains in my cabin." Lucas stood there in his work clothes, dusty from a long day with the cattle, but his eyes were warm, and his presence felt like a shield between her and the judging townswomen. "I do not know much about curtains," Genevieve said shakily. "Well, I know even less, so between the two of us, we might figure something out." He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Genevieve took it. They walked back to the general store together, and the shopkeeper who had just refused to serve Genevieve alone suddenly became obsequiously helpful with Lucas Kane standing beside her. Lucas made a show of asking Genevieve's opinion on various fabrics, treating her advice as though it were invaluable, and insisted on carrying all her packages back to the boarding house along with his own purchases. "Thank you," Genevieve said when they reached Martha's front porch. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Lucas said firmly. "Those women have no right to treat you that way. They believe they have every right. I am exactly what they think I am. You are a hell of a lot more than they will ever understand." Lucas set down the packages and turned to face her directly. "Miss Morrison, Genevieve, I need to say something, and I hope you will hear me out." Genevieve's heart began to pound. "All right. I know your situation. I am not blind, and I am not a fool. I also know you think that makes you somehow less worthy of respect or kindness or any of the things every person deserves. But I am here to tell you that I do not see it that way at all." He took a deep breath. "I see a strong, intelligent, beautiful woman who made a mistake trusting the wrong man. I see someone who is facing the consequences with more courage than most people could manage, and I see someone I have come to care about a great deal. Lucas, you do not understand what you are saying. I understand perfectly. I am saying that I want to court you properly if you will allow it. I am saying that when your baby comes, I want to be there to help you. And I am saying that if you will have me, I would be honored to give that child my name and raise them as my own." Genevieve stared at him in shock. "You cannot mean that. You barely know me." "I know enough. I know that you work harder than anyone I have ever met. I know you are kind to Martha and patient with the rough men who board there. I know you read poetry and that you get a faraway look in your eyes when you watch the sunset over the mountains. I know that when you smile, it feels like the whole world gets brighter." Lucas took her hand gently. "I know that I have never felt this way about anyone before, and I do not want to let you slip away because of other people's small-minded judgment." "I am carrying another man's child," Genevieve whispered. "How could you possibly accept that? The child is not responsible for the circumstances of their birth, and neither are you. Every baby deserves a home and parents who will love them." Lucas's voice was steady and sure. "I grew up without a father. He died in the war when I was 4 years old and my mother struggled to raise me alone. I saw how hard that was for her, and I do not want that for you or your baby. Let me help you. Let me be what you both need." Genevieve felt tears streaming down her face. "Why would you do this? You could have any unmarried woman in this territory." "I do not want any other woman, I want you." Lucas wiped her tears away with his thumb, his touch gentle. "You do not have to answer me right now, think about it. But know that my offer is genuine, and it comes with no expectations except that you give me a chance to prove I mean every word." That evening, Genevieve lay in her small room and pressed her hands against her swollen belly, feeling the baby move beneath her palms. She thought about Lucas's offer and everything it represented. Back in Philadelphia, she had been courted by men who cared about her family's money and social connections. Not one of them had ever asked what she wanted or dreamed about. Not one had ever looked at her the way Lucas did, as though she were precious and worth cherishing. But could she really accept his proposal? It seemed too good to be true, and Genevieve had learned the hard way that things that seemed too good to be true usually were. What if Lucas changed his mind once the baby arrived and reality set in? What if he grew to resent her and the child? What if she was simply trading one form of dependence for another? Yet what were her alternatives? She could stay at Martha's boarding house, working as much as she was able and hoping her cousin's charity did not run out. She could try to find other work after the baby came, though few people in Monticello would hire a woman with an illegitimate child. She could attempt to return east, but her family had made it clear they wanted nothing to do with her until enough time had passed for the scandal to fade. Lucas was offering her something she had not dared to hope for: a real home, a father for her child, and perhaps even a chance at the kind of love she had only read about in novels. Over the next 2 weeks, Lucas courted her with old-fashioned determination. He took her on carefully chaperoned drives through the surrounding countryside in his wagon, showing her the land he had claimed and the cabin he had built with his own hands. He told her about his plans to expand his herd and maybe start raising horses as well. He asked about her life in Philadelphia, listening with genuine interest as she described the city streets, the theaters, the bookshops she had loved to visit. "You miss it?" he asked one afternoon as they sat beside a creek that ran through his property, the water bright and cold from mountain snowmelt. "I miss some things," Genevieve admitted. "The libraries, the music. My younger sister, though she is not allowed to write to me anymore. But I do not miss the constant pressure to conform, to be exactly what everyone expected. Here, I can at least breathe." "You can be whoever you want to be out here," Lucas said. "That is what I love most about this country. It does not matter if you are rich or poor, educated or rough. What matters is whether you are willing to work hard and treat people fairly." "Not everyone shares your progressive views," Genevieve pointed out. "Those women in town certainly do not. Those women are afraid of anything that challenges their narrow understanding of how the world should work. But they do not speak for everyone, and their opinions do not determine your worth." Lucas reached for her hand. "Genevieve, have you thought about my proposal?" She looked down at their joined hands, his so much larger and more callous than hers. "I have thought of little else. But Lucas, I need to know this is truly what you want. Once you commit to this path, there is no going back. You will be bound to me and to a child that is not yours by blood. People will talk and some will never accept it." "Let them talk," Lucas said firmly. "I am asking you to marry me, Genevieve Morrison. I am asking you to let me be your husband and a father to your child. I am asking you to build a life with me here in this wild, beautiful place. And I am telling you that I am absolutely certain this is what I want." Genevieve took a shaky breath. "Then yes, yes, I will marry you. Lucas's face split into a brilliant smile, and he pulled her gently into his arms, careful of her pregnant belly. "You have just made me the happiest man in Utah Territory." They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the courthouse, with Martha and the county clerk as witnesses. Genevieve wore a dress. Martha had helped her alter to fit her changing figure, and Lucas wore his best shirt and a string tie. The minister who had been so quick to condemn Genevieve refused to perform the ceremony, so the judge did it instead, his words brief but sincere. When Lucas kissed her at the end of the vows, Genevieve felt something shift deep in her chest. This was her husband now, this kind cowboy who had seen past her shame to her worth. This was the man who would raise her child as his own. This was her new beginning. They moved to Lucas's ranch that same day. The cabin was small but well built, just 2 rooms with a sleeping loft and a stone fireplace Lucas had constructed himself. There was a barn for the horses, a chicken coop, and a dugout cellar for storing food. The land stretched out in all directions, covered in sage and grassland with the mountains rising blue in the distance. "It is not much yet," Lucas said as he helped Genevieve down from the wagon, "but I plan to add on as we need more space. I have been saving to build a proper house, something worthy of a family." "It is perfect," Genevieve said, and she meant it. The cabin represented honest work and careful planning. It was a place built with purpose and maintained with pride. She felt safer here than she had in her family's grand Philadelphia townhouse. Lucas carried her trunk inside and showed her around, pointing out where he had stored supplies and explaining how the stove worked. "I am not much of a cook," he admitted. "I have been living on beans and bacon mostly. I hope you will not mind teaching me a few things." "I have learned quite a bit from Martha," Genevieve said. "Between the 2 of us, I think we can manage better than beans and bacon." That first evening, they worked together to prepare supper, moving around the small kitchen in a careful dance of consideration and newness. Lucas proved to be a willing student, following Genevieve's instructions for biscuits and gravy with intense concentration. When they finally sat down to eat, the food was simple but good, and Genevieve found herself relaxing for the first time in months. "Tell me about your ranch," she said. "How did you come to be here?" Lucas leaned back in his chair. "I came west right after my mother died 5 years ago. There was nothing left for me in Missouri, and I had heard there was good grazing land opening up in Utah Territory. I worked for other ranchers at first, learning the trade and saving every penny I could. 2 years ago, I had enough to file a claim and buy some starter cattle. It has been hard work building it up, but every year it gets a little better. Do you ever wish you had stayed in Missouri, had an easier life? Not for a minute. This land gets in your blood, the freedom of it, the possibility. Every morning I wake up and know that what I build here is mine, earned by my own sweat and determination. That means something." He looked at her seriously. "I want to build something that will last, Genevieve, something we can pass on to our children and their children after that. A legacy." "Our children." The words sent a warm flutter through Genevieve's chest. "I would like that." As summer faded into autumn, Genevieve settled into her new life. She learned to manage the chickens and milk the cow Lucas kept for dairy. She planted a late garden with seeds Martha gave her, hoping to get one harvest before the frost came. She cooked and cleaned and mended, skills she had never needed in her old life, but that were essential here. Lucas worked from dawn until dusk, mending fences, checking on cattle, cutting hay for winter feed. He came home exhausted but always with a smile for Genevieve, always asking about her day and insisting she sit down while he helped with supper. He was infinitely patient with her as she adjusted to frontier life, teaching her how to handle a rifle for protection and how to read the weather in the mountain clouds. In the evenings, they would sit together by the fireplace, and Lucas would read aloud from the poetry book he had bought her, or they would simply talk, sharing stories about their pasts and dreams about their future. Genevieve found herself falling in love with her husband, truly and deeply, in a way that had nothing to do with obligation or gratitude, and everything to do with who he was as a man. "I never expected to be happy again," she confessed one night as they lay together in the darkness. "I thought my life was over when I realized I was pregnant. I thought I had ruined everything." Lucas pulled her closer, his hand gentle on her swollen belly. "Your life was not over. It was just beginning in a way you had not planned. Sometimes the best things come from the unexpected turns." The baby came on a cold October morning when the first snow was dusting the mountains. Martha rode out with the local midwife, a German woman named Mrs. Schultz, who had delivered half the babies in San Juan County. Lucas paced outside the cabin for hours, chopping enough firewood to last the entire winter, until Martha finally called him inside. "You have a son," she said with a tired smile. Lucas rushed past her to where Genevieve lay exhausted but radiant in their bed, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a quilt. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Lucas, meet your son." He took the baby carefully, his large hands surprisingly gentle, and Genevieve watched as his eyes filled with wonder. "He is perfect, absolutely perfect." He looked at her with so much love it made her chest ache. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names over the past few weeks, and Genevieve had made it clear she wanted Lucas to have the final say since he was choosing to be this child's father in every way that mattered. "I was thinking Thomas, after your father." Lucas's eyes grew bright. "Thomas Kane. I like that. Tommy for short." He touched the baby's tiny hand, and the infant's fingers curled around his thumb. "Hello, Tommy. Welcome to the family." As Genevieve watched her husband bond with the son he was claiming as his own, she felt the last of her shame and fear melt away. This was her family now, built not on society's rules but on love and choice and fierce determination to make something good from difficult circumstances. The winter that followed was harsh, with heavy snows that isolated them for weeks at a time. But the cabin stayed warm, and Lucas had laid in plenty of supplies. Genevieve learned to bake bread and churn butter and make her own candles. She nursed Tommy and sang him lullabies her mother had sung to her, finding joy in motherhood that she had not dared to hope for when she first learned of her pregnancy. Lucas was a devoted father from the start. He would wake in the night to walk Tommy when he was fussy, pacing the small cabin and singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice. He carved a cradle with his own hands and made sure Genevieve had everything she needed to care for their son. He never once treated Tommy as anything other than his own child, and watching them together made Genevieve love her husband even more. "You are a natural father," she told him one evening as he played with Tommy on the floor, making the 3-month-old laugh with delight. "I am just doing what my father would have done if he had lived," Lucas said, "making sure my son knows he is loved and wanted." "Our son," Genevieve corrected gently. "He is ours, Lucas, yours as much as mine." Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers across the rangeland. Lucas hired a hand to help with the ranch work now that the herd had grown, a quiet young man named James who built himself a small bunkhouse on the property. With the extra help, Lucas had more time to spend with Genevieve and Tommy, and they fell into a comfortable rhythm as a family. One warm May afternoon, nearly a year after Genevieve had first arrived in Monticello, Martha came to visit. She brought supplies from town along with news and gossip, settling into the kitchen with Genevieve for coffee while Tommy napped. The town has certainly changed its tune about you, Martha said with satisfaction. Once people saw how Lucas treats you and that baby, and how hard you both work this ranch, they started realizing you are just good people making a life together. I do not particularly care what they think anymore, Genevieve said honestly. I have everything I need right here. That is the spirit, though I will say that minister's wife who was so quick to judge you last year just got caught skimming money from the church collection plate. Seems everyone has their secrets. Genevieve shook her head. I do not wish her ill. I just wish people would remember that none of us are perfect. Lucas Kane is pretty close, Martha said with a knowing smile. You found yourself a good man, cousin. I know, I remind myself of that every day. As Tommy grew from a baby into a toddler, the ranch prospered. Lucas expanded the herd and added a small band of horses that he began training for sale. Genevieve established a productive garden and learned to preserve food for the winter months. They added a second room to the cabin to give Tommy his own space, and Lucas began drawing up plans for the larger house he wanted to build. On their second anniversary, Lucas presented Genevieve with a leather-bound journal. For your writing, he said. You have mentioned you used to keep a diary back in Philadelphia. I thought maybe you would like to start again, record our life here for Tommy and any other children we might have. Genevieve ran her fingers over the smooth leather, touched by his thoughtfulness. Any other children? Are you saying you want more? If you do, Lucas said carefully. I know Tommy's birth was difficult and I would never pressure you, but yes, I would love to have more children with you, a houseful if we are blessed. Genevieve felt a warm glow spread through her chest. Tommy's birth had indeed been difficult, but the thought of having more children with Lucas, babies conceived in love and wanted by both parents, filled her with hope. I would like that too. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1881, delivered by the same Mrs. Schultz who had attended Tommy's birth. Lucas insisted they name her Grace after Genevieve's mother, a gesture that moved her to tears. Little Grace had her father's gray eyes and her mother's dark hair, and Tommy, now nearly 3, was fascinated by his new sister. Baby, he would say solemnly, patting her head with careful toddler gentleness. That is right, your sister, Lucas would tell him. You are the big brother now, you have to help me take care of her and Mama. As Grace grew, the ranch continued to expand. Lucas built the larger house he had promised, a proper 2-story structure with a spacious kitchen, a parlor, and bedrooms for their growing family. Genevieve made curtains from fabric they ordered from Salt Lake City and planted roses beside the front porch. It was a real home, filled with love and laughter and the chaos of children. They had 2 more sons over the next 5 years, William in 1883 and Samuel in 1885. The house that had seemed so spacious when they built it now rang with the sounds of 4 children playing, fighting, and learning about life on a Utah cattle ranch. Lucas taught the boys to ride as soon as they could sit a horse, and Genevieve taught Grace to read from the books they ordered from back east. Sometimes, when Genevieve stood on the porch and watched her family, she could hardly believe this was her life. The scared, shamed girl who had arrived in Monticello 7 years ago seemed like a completely different person. That girl had believed her life was ruined, that she would never be anything more than the sum of her mistakes. But Lucas had shown her a different truth. He had seen past her circumstances to the person she could become, and he had loved her into wholeness. He had given Tommy his name and his devotion, raising him with no distinction from the children they had created together. He had built them a home and a legacy, just as he had promised that first evening when he proposed. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, coming to stand beside her on the porch. The children were playing in the yard, Tommy, now 10 years old and tall like his father, helping William build a fort while Grace supervised and baby Samuel toddled around getting in everyone's way. "How lucky I am," Genevieve said simply. "How grateful." Lucas put his arm around her shoulders. "I am the lucky one. You could have turned me down, you know. You could have decided I was just another man making empty promises. Your promises were never empty. You kept every single one. And I intend to keep on keeping them," Lucas said, pulling her close. "Until we are old and gray and surrounded by grandchildren." Genevieve leaned into his embrace, watching their children play in the golden afternoon light. Tommy had never asked about his birth father, accepting without question that Lucas was his papa. The other children adored their big brother, and he looked after them with protective care that made both Genevieve and Lucas proud. The years continued to pass in the rhythm of ranch life. Calves were born each spring, cattle were driven to market each fall, gardens were planted and harvested. Children grew taller and learned their lessons and helped with the endless work a ranch required. Lucas's reputation as an honest rancher and breeder of quality horses spread throughout the territory, and the Kane Ranch became one of the most successful operations in San Juan County. Monticello grew too, from a rough frontier settlement to a proper town with a school, multiple churches, and even a small library that Genevieve helped to establish. The women who had once shunned her became friends and neighbors, their children playing with her children, their husbands doing business with Lucas. The past was never forgotten, but it no longer defined her. On a warm summer evening in 1890, the family gathered on the porch of the big house after supper. Tommy, now 12, was reading to his younger siblings from a book of Western tales. Grace, 9 years old and already showing signs of her mother's quick intelligence, interrupted frequently with questions and commentary. William and Samuel, 7 and 5, listened with rapt attention. Lucas and Genevieve sat together on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders, watching their children with contentment. Genevieve was 32 now, and Lucas 37. They had been married for nearly 9 years, and every day she loved him more than the day before. "Do you ever think about what your life might have been like if you had stayed in Philadelphia?" Lucas asked quietly. Genevieve considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. I think I would have been miserable. My family would have eventually found me some marriage of convenience, someone willing to overlook my past in exchange for the connection to our family name and money. I would have lived in a fine house and worn beautiful clothes and been utterly empty inside. No regrets then, not a single one. My family sent me west to hide their shame, but what they actually did was set me free." She looked up at her husband. "You saw my worth when I could not see it myself, Lucas. You made me stay not through force or obligation, but through love. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible." "We gave each other that life," Lucas corrected. "I was just a lonely cowboy with a decent piece of land before you came along. You made this place a home. You gave me a family and a purpose beyond just surviving. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Genevieve Kane." She kissed him then, a gentle kiss full of years of love and trust and partnership. Tommy made a disgusted sound that made Grace giggle, but Genevieve just smiled. Let her children see that their parents loved each other. Let them grow up knowing what a real marriage looked like, built on respect and affection and choice. As the sun set behind the Abajo Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, Genevieve felt a profound sense of peace. Her life had not turned out anything like she had planned when she was a girl in Philadelphia. It had been harder in many ways, with physical labor and frontier dangers her younger self could never have imagined. But it had also been richer, fuller, more real than anything she had left behind. The stagecoach that had brought her to Monticello 12 years ago had carried a frightened girl running from shame and judgment. But that journey had led her to Lucas, to love, to a family and a home that were truly hers. Her family had sent her west to hide their embarrassment, but in doing so they had given her the greatest gift imaginable: the chance to start over, to become who she was meant to be, to build a life based on love rather than society's expectations. Lucas had seen her worth when she was at her lowest point, when she believed she had nothing left to offer. He had looked past her circumstances and her condition and seen the strong, capable woman beneath. He had not just made her stay in Monticello, he had made her want to stay, had shown her that this wild, beautiful place could be her home. Tommy finished his story and looked up at his parents. "Papa, will you tell us about when you and Mama first met?" Lucas smiled. "I think your Mama tells that story better than I do." Genevieve laughed. "All right. It was a hot day in May 12 years ago, and I had just arrived in town on the stagecoach. I was tired and scared and so far from everything I knew. The next morning, I was helping Aunt Martha serve breakfast at the boarding house, and in walked this cowboy with kind gray eyes and a smile that made me forget, just for a moment, how lost I felt." "And you fell in love right away?" Grace asked romantically. "Not right away," Genevieve admitted. "Your papa had to work to win my heart, but he was patient and persistent, and eventually I realized that he was offering me something precious. A second chance, a real partnership, a love that did not depend on me being perfect. I knew from the first moment," Lucas said quietly. "The instant I saw your mother, I knew my life was about to change." Tommy, old enough now to understand some of his parents' history, spoke up. "Were people mean to Mama when she first came to town?" Lucas and Genevieve exchanged glances. They had agreed to be honest with their children about the past, age appropriately, so they would understand that people could change and grow and overcome difficulties. "Some people were unkind," Genevieve said carefully. "They judged me for mistakes I had made before I came here. But your papa helped me see that their judgment did not determine my worth. He stood beside me and showed everyone that I deserved respect and kindness." "Your mama is the bravest person I know," Lucas told his children. "She came to a strange place, faced hard circumstances, and never gave up. She built a good life through her own strength and determination. That is something to admire." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Martha called the children inside to get ready for bed. There were the usual protests and negotiations, but eventually all four were herded toward the house. Tommy lingered on the porch for a moment. "Papa, Mama, thank you," he said seriously. "For what, son?" Lucas asked. "For being my parents, for being good to each other, for making this home." Tommy smiled, looking suddenly older than his 12 years. "I know some of my story is different from Will's and Sam's, but I have never felt different, not for a single day. You both made sure of that." After Tommy went inside, Genevieve pressed her face against Lucas's shoulder, overcome with emotion. "We did right by him, by all of them." "We did," Lucas agreed, "and we are going to keep doing right by them for as long as we live." They sat together on the porch swing as full darkness fell, and the sounds of the ranch settled into night. Inside, they could hear Martha getting the children settled, Grace's voice rising in a bedtime song, the boys' laughter and arguments fading into quiet. "Do you think our children understand how lucky we are?" Genevieve asked. "To have found each other, to have built this life." "They will when they are older," Lucas said. "Right now, this is just normal to them, which is exactly as it should be. Let them grow up secure and loved, never doubting that they are wanted. When they are older, they will look back and understand." I want them to know they can overcome anything, Genevieve said. That mistakes do not have to define you, that there is always a path forward if you are brave enough to take it. They will know because they will watch us live that truth every day, Lucas assured her. Inside the house, the sounds had finally quieted as the children fell asleep. The ranch was peaceful, the night air sweet with the scent of sage and grass. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods Lucas had planted near the house. I love you, Genevieve said simply. I do not say it enough, but I love you so much it sometimes overwhelms me. You saved me, Lucas Kane. We saved each other, Lucas corrected gently, tilting her face up to kiss her properly. And this is just the beginning. We have decades ahead of us, Genevieve. Decades to watch our children grow and have children of their own. Decades to build this ranch into something even greater. Decades to love each other. And they did exactly that. Over the years that followed, the Kane Ranch became a legacy. Tommy grew into a fine young man who eventually took over much of the ranch operations, working side by side with his father. He married a teacher from Salt Lake City and gave Genevieve and Lucas their first grandchildren. Grace became a writer, publishing articles about life in Utah Territory and eventually a memoir that touched hearts across the country. William and Samuel both chose to stay on the ranch, expanding it further and developing new breeding lines. Lucas and Genevieve grew old together in the house he had built, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. They faced hardships, droughts, and hard winters, illness and loss, but they faced them together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing year. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1918, their entire extended family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were nearly 50 people there, descendants of that frightened girl who had arrived on a stagecoach and the lonely cowboy who had seen her worth. As Genevieve looked around at the faces of her family, she marveled at how one act of kindness, one man's willingness to look past society's judgment, had created all of this love and life. "What are you thinking, my dear?" Lucas asked. He was 73 now, silver-haired and weathered but still strong, still the man who had won her heart 4 decades before. "I am thinking about that girl who arrived in Monticello so long ago," Genevieve said. "How terrified she was, how certain her life was over. If I could go back and tell her what was waiting for her, that all her pain would lead to this incredible life, I wonder if she would believe me." "She would believe you," Lucas said with certainty. "Because underneath all that fear, she was brave and strong. She just needed someone to remind her of that. You did more than remind me. You showed me who I could be." Lucas took her hand, his grip still firm despite his age. "We showed each other. That has always been the secret of us, Genevieve. We made each other better." As the celebration continued around them, their family laughing and talking and creating memories of their own, Genevieve leaned against her husband's shoulder and felt complete contentment. Her family had sent her west to hide their shame, believing they were protecting their reputation by exiling their scandalous daughter. But they had actually given her the greatest gift imaginable. They had sent her to Lucas. He had seen her worth when she could not see it herself. He had offered her not just his name but his genuine love and respect. He had claimed her child as his own and never treated Tommy as anything less than a beloved son. He had built them a home and a legacy, kept every promise he had ever made, and loved her with unwavering devotion through 40 years of marriage. He had made her stay not through obligation or force, but through the irresistible pull of authentic love. And in staying, in choosing to build a life with this kind cowboy in the wilds of Utah Territory, Genevieve had found everything she had never known she needed: purpose, partnership, a family built on love rather than duty, and a happiness deeper and more lasting than anything her Philadelphia society could have offered. The shame her family had tried to hide had transformed into her greatest blessing. The child born from her supposed disgrace had grown into a man who made her proud every day. The frontier town where she had been sent to disappear had become the home where she truly belonged. As the sun set over the Abajo Mountains one more time, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson, Genevieve Kane smiled at her husband of 40 years. Lucas Kane had seen her worth when she arrived in Monticello as a disgraced woman with no future. He had made her stay with his steadfast love and unshakable faith in her value. And together, they had built something that would last forever. A family rooted in forgiveness, nourished by love, and strengthened by the knowledge that everyone deserves a second chance. That was their legacy. That was the story Genevieve wrote in her journal for her descendants to read, the truth she wanted them to carry forward. That shame could be transformed into pride, that mistakes could become the foundation for something beautiful, and that love, real love, saw worth where others saw only failure. Lucas had given her that gift, and together they had passed it on to generations who would carry their story forward into the future, forever.